Opening. Most work systems are designed around continuity. Tasks are defined so they can outlast individuals. Roles are shaped to be filled, vacated, and filled again. This is often described as resilience. If one part pauses, another can take its place. Work continues. In environments where replacement is clear, pressure remains diffuse. Absence is expected. Transition is planned. No single role carries excessive attention. The system feels calm in these conditions. It knows how to respond to change. But not all functions remain easily interchangeable. Over time, some roles absorb knowledge that is not written down. Context accumulates. Judgment becomes situational rather than procedural. Replacement becomes possible in theory but uncertain in practice. At first, this uncertainty is unnoticed. Output remains steady, work continues without interruption. Gradually, however, the system begins to register risk, not because something has failed, but because something might. This awareness does not announce itself. There are no formal discussions, no visible shifts in structure. Attention simply increases. Questions are asked more frequently. Visibility improves. The work itself may not change, but the conditions around it do. What was once assumed to be replaceable becomes something the system watches more closely. This watching does not feel like suspicion, it feels like interest, like responsibility. The system does not act against the role, it leans toward it. Pressure begins to form without instruction, not through demand, but through presence. Expectations settle more firmly, flexibility becomes quieter. Nothing here resembles threat. There is no signal of danger. There is only the sense that something matters more than before, and that its absence would be noticed. This episode observes that moment, the shift from clarity to uncertainty, from interchangeability to attention, not as crisis, but as pressure that accumulates without sound. Observation. In most work environments, replaceability is treated as a baseline condition. Roles are defined so that work continues even when people change. Processes are written, knowledge is shared, transition is assumed to be possible. This assumption keeps pressure low. When replacement is clear, attention remains distributed. No single role carries disproportionate weight. Absence is manageable, variation is tolerated. The system remains calm when it knows how to respond. But this condition is not static. Over time, certain roles begin to accumulate work that cannot be easily standardized. Situations repeat, but never in exactly the same way. Decisions begin to rely on judgment rather than instruction. This accumulation is not planned. It emerges through repetition. The same role is present when questions arise. The same person responds when uncertainty appears. Context builds quietly. At first, this feels like efficiency. Fewer explanations are needed, communication shortens, outcomes stabilize. The system benefits from this familiarity. But familiarity also introduces opacity. Knowledge becomes embedded rather than explicit. Understanding exists, but it is difficult to separate from the role itself. Replaceability begins to blur. On paper, the role remains interchangeable. In practice, transition would require time, overlap, and adjustment. The system begins to sense this gap. Nothing changes immediately, output continues, work appears unaffected. What changes is attention. The system begins to look more closely at the role. Questions become more detailed. Check-ins occur more often. Visibility increases. This attention is not framed as concern. It is framed as coordination, as alignment, as interest. From within the role, it may feel like inclusion. The system asks for input more frequently. Decisions pass through the same point. What the system is doing is not testing performance. It is assessing dependence. As uncertainty around replacement grows, tolerance for disruption decreases. Absence becomes noticeable. Delays feel heavier. Small inconsistencies draw focus. Pressure begins to accumulate, not through demand, but through awareness. The role becomes something the system watches, not because it is failing, but because it matters. This watching alters behavior. The role begins to anticipate needs. Information is offered before it is requested. Issues are resolved quietly to avoid interruption. The system does not require this. It benefits from it. As a result, reliance deepens. The role becomes central without being elevated. It carries responsibility without authority. Replaceability is no longer assumed, it is quietly questioned. The system responds by narrowing uncertainty. Oversight becomes routine. Documentation increases. Dependencies are clarified. But the uncertainty does not disappear, it shifts inward. The role begins to carry the pressure of continuity personally. Stability becomes something to maintain rather than something to expect. This pressure remains unspoken. There are no warnings, no explicit expectations are revised. Everything continues to function. From the outside, the environment appears unchanged. Work flows, results hold, the system seems stable. Internally, however, a recalibration has occurred. Replaceability has moved from a given to a concern. The system has not acted against the rule, it has leaned toward it. And in that leaning, quiet pressure has begun to take shape. When uncertainty becomes a tension, once uncertainty around replacement enters a system, it does not remain abstract. It begins to reorganize behavior. The work itself may remain unchanged, tasks continue, output holds, deadlines are met. From a distance, nothing appears different, but attention has shifted. The system begins to orient itself around the role it is no longer certain it could easily replace. This orientation is subtle. It does not interrupt flow, it overlays it. Communication paths shorten. Questions that once circulated now arrive directly. Decisions pass through familiar points. The system leans on what already understands its context. This leaning is efficient. It reduces friction, it saves time. It also concentrates pressure. As attention gathers, the role becomes more visible, not publicly, but structurally. Its presence is assumed in planning. Its availability is factored into timelines. Its continuity is built into expectations. This visibility does not arrive as scrutiny, it arrives as inclusion. Meetings include the role more often. Input is requested earlier. Updates are expected more regularly. The language remains neutral, cooperative, professional. What changes is density. The role is now involved in more moments of decision, even if authority has not changed. Responsibility expands laterally, not vertically. At this stage, the system is not evaluating performance, it is evaluating risk. Risk does not require failure, it requires uncertainty. As uncertainty grows, tolerance for disruption decreases. The margin for error narrows, not because mistakes are punished, but because their consequences feel heavier. Absence becomes a variable the system notices. Even planned absence requires adjustment. Even brief unavailability introduces complexity. The system does not respond with restriction, it responds with proximity. The role is kept close to processes that matter. Its knowledge is consulted, its judgment is relied upon. Alternatives remain theoretical. Over time, this creates a quiet asymmetry. Other roles remain interchangeable. They rotate, they step in and out. The role under attention remains fixed. Fixity does not feel imposed, it feels necessary. The system does not say, "You cannot be replaced." It behaves as if replacement would be difficult. This behavior shapes expectation. The role begins to sense its importance through implication rather than statement. It is not told it is essential, it is treated as if it is. This treatment produces pressure without command. Decisions are anticipated, problems are resolved early, disruption is avoided preemptively. The role adjusts itself to preserve continuity. The system benefits from this adjustment. It does not ask for more, it receives more. As a result, dependence deepens further. Replaceability, once unclear, now feels increasingly distant. Not because it has been disproven, but because it has not been tested. The system postpones testing. Testing introduces risk. Stability feels preferable. What remains is a role that functions well, is relied upon, and is quietly held in place by attention. Nothing dramatic has occurred, no authority has shifted, no rules have changed. But the atmosphere is different. Uncertainty has not produced action, it has produced watching. And watching, sustained over time, is one of the quietest ways pressure enters a system. Machiavellian lens. From a power perspective, replaceability is not a moral question, it is a structural one. Systems remain stable when roles can be exchanged without consequence. What power values most is not loyalty or effort, but continuity. Continuity depends on predictability. Predictability depends on knowing what can be replaced. When replacement is clear, authority remains relaxed. Roles can shift, people can leave, the structure holds. Uncertainty alters this balance. When a role becomes difficult to replace, power does not respond with confrontation, it responds with attention. This attention is not suspicion, it is precaution. Power becomes cautious around what it cannot easily substitute, not because it fears opposition, but because it fears interruption. From this lens, quiet pressure is not accidental, it is a stabilizing response. The system begins to observe more closely. Information flows are tightened, visibility increases. The role is kept within reach of oversight. This is not to challenge performance, but to reduce risk. Power does not need to assert itself loudly. It prefers arrangements that make disruption unlikely. When replacement is uncertain, the system does not test boundaries. It secures continuity by narrowing variance. This narrowing is achieved without rule changes. Flexibility is not revoked. It simply becomes expensive. Absence requires coordination. Transfer requires planning. Change introduces questions. The system does not forbid movement, it surrounds movement with friction. From a power perspective, this is efficient. It preserves stability while avoiding conflict. The role remains productive, output continues. What changes is position. The role is drawn closer to the center of operations. Its judgment is consulted, its presence is assumed, its absence is noticed. This closeness is often mistaken for trust. In practice, it is containment. Power prefers proximity to dependency. What cannot be replaced must be visible. What must remain stable must remain observable. Historically, systems have always treated indispensable functions this way. They are retained, monitored, and rarely allowed to drift far from where they are needed. This is not punishment, it is insurance. The more difficult replacement becomes, the less tolerance exists for unpredictability. What power seeks is not submission, but assurance. Quiet pressure provides that assurance. It encourages self-regulation, it discourages disruption, it aligns the role's behavior with the system's need for continuity. No force is required. From this lens, replaceability is not about disposability, it is about manageability. What can be replaced does not need attention. What cannot be replaced attracts it. Attention settles into expectation, expectation becomes pressure, and pressure, when sustained quietly, shapes behavior more reliably than command. Power does not need to threaten what it depends on, it only needs to stay close to it. That closeness is enough. Modern framing, Greem. In modern work systems, replaceability is rarely stated directly. It is inferred through signals. Visibility, comparison, and evaluation quietly shape how secure a role feels. Contemporary organizations often emphasize flexibility. Roles are described as adaptable. Teams are framed as interchangeable. This language suggests resilience. At the same time, performance is increasingly legible. Output is tracked, response times are noticed, contributions are compared, even when no formal ranking exists. This combination creates a subtle tension. When a role appears easily replaceable, attention remains diffuse. Performance is reviewed, but pressure stays low. Variation is expected. Absence does not disrupt planning. But when replaceability becomes uncertain, visibility intensifies. The role begins to receive more attention, not in moments of failure, but in moments of success. Good outcomes are noted. Consistency is remembered. Dependability becomes associated with the same point. This association increases comparison. Others are measured against the rule, even informally. The rule is measured against itself. Expectation rises without announcement. Modern systems rarely apply pressure through direct instruction. They apply it through metrics, benchmarks, and implied standards. What performs well becomes the reference. As a result, the role begins to feel watched, even when no one is watching directly. Performance data persists. Past output remains visible. Replaceability begins to feel conditional, not because it has been denied, but because it has become uncertain. This uncertainty produces quiet evaluation. The system begins to ask implicitly how easily this role could be substituted without loss. No one voices the question. It is answered through observation. The role responds by stabilizing itself. Output is kept consistent. Variability is reduced. Risk is avoided. This response is not requested. It is inferred. In modern workplaces, pressure often arrives framed as opportunity, more responsibility, more involvement, more visibility. But increased visibility reduces ambiguity. Once performance is clear, it becomes harder to disappear. The role becomes defined by what it delivers reliably. That reliability becomes expectation. At this point, replaceability no longer feels neutral. It feels evaluative. The question is no longer whether the role can be replaced, but whether it should be disrupted. Disruption introduces uncertainty. Uncertainty is avoided. As a result, the system leans further into what already works. Alternatives remain undeveloped. Backup options remain theoretical. The role remains productive. It remains valued. It also remains under quiet pressure. In this framing, pressure is not applied to force compliance. It is applied to preserve continuity. The system does not say, "You cannot be replaced." It behaves as if replacement would be costly. That behavior is enough. Modern systems rarely need to exert control directly. They allow comparison and visibility to do the work. Replaceability becomes something that is felt rather than defined. And that feeling shapes behavior more reliably than any instruction. Psychological mechanism. Quiet pressure does not arrive as fear. It arrives as awareness. A sense that attention has shifted, even if nothing has been said. At first, the role experiences this attention as interest. Questions are directed there more often. Input is requested earlier. Decisions seem to pass through the same point. This feels validating. The system appears to recognize reliability. Over time, however, the nature of this recognition changes. It stops feeling optional. Expectations settle without discussion. Availability is assumed. Continuity becomes implied rather than negotiated. Psychologically, this alters reference points. What once felt like contribution begins to feel like obligation. The role becomes more sensitive to disruption. Absence carries weight. Delay feels visible. Even minor deviations attract internal concern. This concern does not come from threat. It comes from inference. The role begins to anticipate the system's needs. Information is prepared before it is requested. Problems are resolved quietly to avoid escalation. This anticipation reduces friction. It also increases internal monitoring. Self-regulation intensifies. Performance is tracked inwardly before it is tracked outwardly. The role becomes its own overseer. Mistakes are no longer just errors, they feel like signals, not of incompetence, but of instability. As a result, behavior narrows, variability is reduced, risk is postponed. Consistency becomes the priority. This narrowing is experienced as professionalism. Reliability becomes identity. Psychologically, replaceability shifts from an abstract concept to a personal condition. The role begins to sense that continuity depends on its presence, even if this has never been stated. This sense produces quiet vigilance. The role remains attentive, responsive, and available. The system benefits from this alignment. It does not need to apply pressure directly. Pressure has already been internalized. Over time, the role carries the cost of uncertainty on behalf of the structure. Stability becomes something to maintain actively rather than something to expect passively. This creates a feedback loop. Consistent performance reinforces reliance. Reliance reinforces attention. Attention reinforces self-monitoring. The loop tightens gradually. At no point does the role feel explicitly constrained. There are no clear boundaries being enforced. There is only a growing sense that deviation would have consequences. This sense does not need to be confirmed. It only needs to be plausible. Psychologically, quiet pressure is powerful because it feels self-generated. The role believes it is choosing consistency. In reality, choice has been reorganized around expectation. Replaceability has not been removed. It has become uncertain. That uncertainty is enough to shape behavior. The role remains effective. It remains reliable. From the outside, everything appears stable. Internally, however, attention has turned inward. The role carries the system's concern about disruption as if it were its own. This is how pressure persists without instruction, not through force, not through threat, but through awareness that continuity matters and that it is being quietly watched. Closing observation. Replaceability is often described as a safeguard. It allows systems to continue without disruption. It distributes pressure and keeps roles interchangeable. When this condition holds, attention remains light. Work moves without weight. Absence does not linger. But when replaceability becomes uncertain, the atmosphere shifts. Nothing dramatic occurs. No authority intervenes. The work itself may not change at all. What changes is attention. The system begins to lean toward what it cannot easily substitute. It watches more closely. It checks more often. It stays near. This leaning does not feel like control. It feels like concern for continuity. Over time, concern becomes expectation. Expectation becomes pressure. The pressure remains quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not demand compliance. It simply reshapes what feels possible. Flexibility narrows without being revoked. Movement becomes complicated without being denied. Absence carries weight without accusation. The role continues to function well. Output remains stable. From the outside, nothing appears constrained. Internally, however, the range of acceptable behavior has shifted. Replaceability is no longer neutral. It has become something to preserve. This pattern does not depend on intention. It does not require strategy. It emerges wherever uncertainty meets dependence. Power does not need to act forcefully here. It allows attention to do the work, and attention, when sustained, is enough. Until the next observation.